Hey, so my name is Bob Kenny. I'm with the firm of Birch, Stewart, Klush & Birch. I've been with that firm for about 31 years, going on 32. My area of practice is, I guess, what people traditionally call soft IP, but I don't generally like that term. In my firm, I have a lot of partners and associates who do only patent prosecution work. And even though they've been to law school, when they have an issue that they don't really understand or want to deal with, they hand it to me. And for them, that's hard IP. That's impossible IP. So that's, from the trademark side, I sort of see that IP is, the kind of work we do is not necessarily soft IP. A lot of different issues. Almost every day there's a different issue. And one of those that I deal with regularly is the idea of combating counterfeits. On behalf of several clients, do work on anti-counterfeiting work, and so that's what we're going to talk about here today. And I'll let you introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm Tony Hickey. I'm Chief IP Counsel for Cummins. We are the largest diesel engine manufacturer in the world. My company manufactures engines, generators, and all the other related products. And so we have facilities really everywhere you would imagine counterfeiting takes place. So China, India, Brazil, the US, Canada, all over the world. As Tasha mentioned, I started my career at the Patent and Trademark Office. Then I worked at a firm for a bit, and then I went in-house. I deal with counterfeiting every single day of the year, including Christmas. So I'm actually really surprised that this topic is not addressed at more IP conferences, because it's a really big issue when you work in-house.
So Tony and I thought that before we talk about the issue of how to combat counterfeits, we want to explain, maybe get into a little bit of what exactly is a counterfeit and why do we care? Why do we want to combat counterfeits? So that's our first slide. Is before addressing, we want to see how and why, what and why counterfeits are, and why do we combat them. So next slide. So maybe if you put these in, maybe you want to talk about them.
Sure. You want me to go in?
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So when I went in-house, one of the interesting things that I found is that we had a lot of resources dedicated to patent prosecution activity. We had a lot of resources dedicated to registering trademarks, and we didn't really have a systematic or strategic approach to understanding whether we were going to be involved in the counterfeiting fight. And so it took us a while to really understand what our priorities were and what we were attempting to fight internationally. And so one of the things that we did is we looked jurisdictionally about where we were having a lot of issues, where our sales were starting to lag, and we started doing investigations, actual market investigations, and we found that there's a correlation between an increase in counterfeiting activity and a decrease in legitimate sales of our products. And we used that information to actually drive our counterfeiting strategy. And so when we start talking about counterfeiting for our company, it's a major issue because our products have to be certified, because if you've been following anything that's been going on with Volkswagen and some other automotive companies, you know that when an engine goes into a car or a truck or a marine application, there's this particulate that comes out of the back, and that is considered toxic or noxious, and so it has to be measured. Counterfeit engines, on the other side, though we don't manufacture them and they don't have these treatment systems generally that will keep them clean, we still can have liability for that if that counterfeit product carries our brand. So we're pretty diligent in making sure that we can identify counterfeit products and get them off the market, because it opens our company up for liability.
Okay. So next slide. So there, as Tony was talking about, there's lots of different issues with respect to what is a counterfeit. Obviously, the common type I deal with on a regular basis for clients, and similarly, I deal with this at least 3-4 times a week. I get emails from U.S. Customs officers relating to counterfeit goods that they've detained at the customs ports and asking for our determination as to whether they're counterfeit or not. Typically, a counterfeit product is a product which is not authentic. It's made typically to look like an authentic product, including using to various degrees, accurately or not accurately, the trademark and colors and trade dress of the product. Sometimes they may be authentic products that were tampered with, were changed in some way, and then shipped into the U.S. And then also we deal often with what are called gray market goods, which are really authentic products, but were not designed for the U.S. market. So perhaps they were designed to be sold in Europe or somewhere else where the standards are different. The strict standards for product safety are different. And even though they're authentic, they come into the U.S. And those gray market products present a unique problem for the trademark owner, the product owner, because the counterfeit laws themselves don't necessarily preclude them from coming into the U.S. market. You've got to find other ways to combat those gray market goods. So there's a lot of different levels of what we find, and I will tell you that in the 20 some odd years I've been doing this, counterfeiters are getting much better, much better. Early on, we found lots of counterfeit products that even spelled the trademark wrong. Now you don't see that. There's very expertise at copying trademarks, trade dress, the product packaging, all of that are the types of things we look at. Okay, next slide. So that gives you an idea of what we're looking at. The question is, why do we want to combat counterfeits? And as we were thinking about this, we sort of thought there's really two levels. There's the social issues, the moral issues with respect to counterfeits, and then, of course, for the trademark owner, there's the business and monetary issues. So let's talk first about the societal issues and the moral issues. And obviously, one of the big problems or potential problems with counterfeit goods is if it's a defective or inferior product. It can injure a person, it can hurt them or kill them, and that is obviously not good for the person or for the trademark owner, because it can harm the value of the brand. I will say that the extreme of this type of situation, I went to an anti-counterfeiting conference years ago, and there was a gentleman there who was the head of anti-counterfeiting for a large pharmaceutical company. And he talked about how counterfeiters will take pharmaceuticals, they'll remove the active ingredient from it, so you have not a harmful product, there's just nothing in it. There's no active ingredient to do what it's supposed to do to cure the disease it's supposed to cure. So the doctor prescribes it to the cancer patient, for example. The cancer patient thinks they're getting a good drug. The drug doesn't work, not surprisingly. The patient dies. The doctor says, well, this is just one of those cases where the patient didn't survive, it didn't work. And that's the extreme of what happens with counterfeiting. So this is not just a knockoff purse that, the handle broke, the strap broke the second day I had it, or the watch that stopped working or something like that. This goes all the way from the consumer good that won't necessarily harm the person, but could be inferior in quality, all the way up to very harmful products. A cell phone battery that's manufactured improperly that explodes when you've got the phone to your ear. There's all different levels of what could happen here. And so this really is a social issue. This is protecting the consuming public. Okay. Same slide. I want to go back one. So the second issue with respect to societal and moral issues is, the profits from counterfeiting, it's been shown, it's been proven, go to support terrorism, organized crime, and drug and sex trafficking. So, we always try to educate people on the idea that while you think it might be harmful that I'm buying this, cheap pair of knockoff pairs of running shoes, who's it hurting? If they're not very good, well, I got what I paid for. Well, it is hurting because the profits from that are going into these other, these areas where they're being used for unlawful purposes. And finally, counterfeit goods, they're often made with child labor in very poor, horrendous working conditions. So all of these things are ones that, you want to initially think of, why do we want to combat counterfeit goods? Well, there's some real social issues here, and that we need to educate people on as to why we're making this effort, not just from a business perspective or a monetary perspective to the trademark owner, but from the perspective of society in general.
Can I add something here? I just want to talk about a personal experience that I had with this. When I was at the Patent and Trademark Office, I did start as an examiner, and I examined for several years, and then I went into the division that is responsible for international work, so working on treaties or training on counterfeiting. And one of the areas that this segment of the office runs is called the Global Intellectual Property Academy. And they bring representatives from all over the world, including customs officers, and they come in for training sessions. And so, surprise, surprise, when I joined this office, I was assigned the Africa portfolio. Who would have thought? Wonder how that happened. And so we had some customs officers that came in from Zambia, in South Africa and Angola. And we did a counterfeiting session, and we walked through telltale signs that you would see when you find a counterfeiting organization. And one of the customs officers from Zambia had an aha moment sitting in our class. And he realized that a factory that he had just recently raided had all the makings for a very popular US brand of petroleum jelly, but everything else that would indicate that that was a counterfeiting outfit was not there. So there were no documents there to indicate bill of sale. There were no labels there. There was insufficient packaging materials for the number of vats. And he took that information from that session and went back to Zambia. And after they started tracing and following and monitoring that factory, they were able to determine that there were 4 other locations in Zambia where there was assembly taking place, packaging, and export, and that those products had gone into 5 countries in sub-Saharan Africa and had killed children. And so when we talk about organized crime being involved, and we talk about child labor, and we talk about conditions, you talk about products that are actually seeping across country lines and are coming to the US, they're going everywhere in the world. And it was a really, really powerful experience for me. And then 3 months later, we actually took a delegation and we went to that factory, and everything was still there. They hadn't moved any of it. And it was really, really powerful to be there and see firsthand what's going on everywhere, not just in Africa, but everywhere. And to know that every time we pick up and we think about buying a fake product, that's the cost to society globally as a whole. So I just wanted to share that because that was my experience, and that's why when I joined my company, I became very, very passionate about making sure that our products, that we had legitimate products in the marketplace, and that we were doing everything that we could to fight counterfeiters. So I just wanted to share my personal experience.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks. Next slide. And so the second aspect of this is obviously the business, monetary, and regulatory issues that the trademark owner, the brand owner, faces. Obviously, inferior counterfeit goods, as I mentioned, can harm the reputation or goodwill of the mark and the brand. We're seeing more and more often things like cosmetics where they're finding all kinds of ingredients in there that don't belong in anything that you should put anywhere near your face or body. And even not just the label, the packaging, the duplication of the mark, the sales price point. I mean, one of the big telltale signs has always been, if I can get something for 1/100th of the price I would otherwise pay, we're smart enough to know this is not an authentic product. Counterfeiters are getting so good that they're able to push that price point up to close enough to the actual retail price that it's harder and harder to tell if you're really actually getting a counterfeit product. So that's another challenge. Secondly, counterfeit goods can sometimes cannibalize some of the sales of the genuine goods, like in that instance where, I can pay 50 cents less for this one. I'm cannibalizing the sales from the actual authentic product. Counterfeit goods require manufacturers of genuine goods to spend resources on anti-counterfeiting efforts, and obviously Tony can talk a lot more about that in terms of what they do in-house. I know that with respect to our clients, we spend a lot of time trying to track down importers, exporters, keep records of those. Just even making the determination as to whether something is authentic or not takes a significant amount of time. And then finally, the regulatory requirements need to be met that aren't typically met, as Tony mentioned, with respect to the products if they're counterfeit goods.
And so just a couple of things here. One, I want to share some experiences at a couple of things that we've done at my company. We did a market study of 5 markets in Nigeria. And when we did the study, we realized that for one of our product lines, 90% of the products on the market that were sold carrying our brand were fake. And so we immediately moved into that marketplace, engaged local customs, engaged local officers, and worked over the course of 6 months to remove those fake products and to replace them with legitimate products. But I think that was sort of an aha moment for that business, because they realized that their sales weren't low in that country because they didn't have market awareness or they didn't have brand awareness or that people didn't want to buy our products. The sales were low because the counterfeit products were actually taking away from legitimate sales. The second thing that I want to mention is with the regulatory requirements, my company is the supplier for generators to the U.S. Army. So when you think about our Army being in Iraq and our Army being in all these places in the Middle East, when they need to clean their water and they need to stay warm and they need lights on, they're relying on our generators. And because of that, because we're a military supplier, we have to certify that our supply chain is free from counterfeit-related activity. And we are more than happy to certify that because it's important to us that we keep our troops safe. And so we go through a certification process every year to make sure that we can maintain our supply base and that we can represent to the U.S. government that we're doing everything that we can to ensure that every integrated product that goes into our products come from legitimate sources. But these are the sorts of things that are really important when you're in-house and making sure that you're preserving the propriety of your product line.
Thanks. So what is the cost of counterfeit goods? Counterfeit goods cost the U.S. something like $29 billion to $41 billion annually. And these numbers are actually a little outdated. It's probably quite a bit more than that. That second one, globally, the cost of counterfeit goods is as much as $461 billion. I've read recently that that's over $500 billion at this point. So this is a huge problem worldwide. It's a significant problem, not just at the trademark or brand owners level, but across all borders, across all countries, and globally. Thanks. Next slide.
Just one thing on that, another anecdote, you guys can tell me if you get tired of hearing these, but when I joined our company, we actually didn't have a global approach to recording our marks with customs organizations. And so we started doing that by looking at different regions where we would record. In the first year when we recorded in Russia, we added close to $4 million to our distributors' bottom line in that region by being able to stop and interdict and get the products at the border that were coming in from China and stop them going into Russia. And so what we've been very diligent about is actually tracing for our business members how much product we are seizing that is fake, so that we can do a direct correlation to their increase in sales. And that's how we're able to justify the legal spend.
Thank you. Next slide. Just some more information about what the cost is. The top 9 most counterfeited products in the USA, 2012 and 2013. You can see these optical media, DVD, CDs, 26.8 million. Labels, tags, not attached to the product, just counterfeit labels and tags that someone can take and put on whatever garment they wanted to. 41.8 million. Computers and accessories, 47.7 million. Footwear, 54.9 million. And the list goes on the next slide as well, and you can read these. So it's this breaks down sort of by product or by industry, but this is sort of what we saw in terms of the totals. This gives you the breakdowns by industry in terms of the cost worldwide for counterfeit goods. All right, next slide. All right, so the main part of this talk now is how do we combat this? And Tony mentioned about recording marks with different jurisdictions. In the United States, you can record your trademark, your registered trademark, with the Customs Bureau. It's a relatively inexpensive thing to do, and it's extremely useful and extremely effective. What happens is when you record that mark or your marks, the marks you want to protect with customs, that gets sent out to all the ports, whether it be airports, shipping ports, whatever the ports are of entry into the United States. They have customs officers that review the products that come in through those ports. If your trademark is registered with them and they have a question as to whether a product that's coming in through the port is an authentic product, they'll contact the person that's designated as the person to be contacted on behalf of the trademark owner. In my case, for my clients, it's me, since I'm the person who's the attorney of record on the trademark registration. And I'll receive emails or phone calls from those customs officers and say, hey, look, we've got these products. We're not sure if they're counterfeit or not. Can you help us out? Just to back up slightly, at the customs entry ports, there's basically 3 things the customs officers will do. They will immediately seize the product because it's clear to them that it's counterfeit. They don't even have to ask us. They know it's counterfeit. And eventually we'll get a notice of that says what it was, where it was seized, who the importer was, who the exporter was, and we keep that for the client's records. The second step is, they might think it looks authentic and it passes through into the marketplace. And the third is they might say, we're not sure, so rather than seizing these goods and destroying them, we're going to detain them. we're going to contact the trademark owner who's recorded their marks with customs, and we're going to ask them for their determination. And basically, if you come to the determination that it is counterfeit, you've got to give reasons to the customs officers as to why you believe it's counterfeit, and they'll then take that and seize it, and it becomes part of that product lot that is seized and destroyed eventually by customs.
So one thing that I wanted to add here is this is a place where I think it's really important if you're in-house to know how your products go to the market, and if you're outside counsel, knowing how your clients' products get to the market. Our marks are not registered with U.S. Customs. You're probably like, well, you're a U.S.-based company. Why are your marks not registered? Our marks aren't registered because we want the products caught by customs before they exit the place where we believe they're being manufactured. And about 60 to 70% of what we found through our research, about 60 to 70% of the products that carry our brands and are fake are manufactured in China and in Southeast Asia. So we are registered in China and Southeast Asia. We're registered in the Middle East because we also have a lot of problems with counterfeit products there. And we focus our resources on recording in those countries and going in and training the customs officers there. We train at least 4 times a year. We send in our teams. We send in our product authentication experts. We send in our outside counsel and someone from my team, or I actually go and we train those customs officers to identify authentic products so that they can be on the front lines and helping stop those products from actually ever leaving China or actually ever leaving Vietnam. Because our sense is that once it leaves that region, then it's going to be much harder for us to actually catch that someplace else in the world. The other places where we're recorded are places where we believe they're transit countries. So for us, if our products make it into an embargoed country, that's a big deal. So we make sure that we're recorded in Russia because we have concerns about our products going into Russia and then ultimately going to Iraq or Syria or North Korea or other places. And so we are really careful in trying to record and be strategic about where we're recording because you can't record everywhere. The reason you can't record everywhere is because there's no company on earth that can deal with customs reports coming in every single day, alerting you to a suspicious shipment. I can't imagine there's a company that has the bandwidth to do that. So we're really strategic about where we record and where we train customs officers.
Yeah. And for our clients, for example, we'll often try to set up a worldwide network of associates. So perhaps, as Tony mentioned, most of the products that we encounter that are counterfeit goods either come out of or come through China or Hong Kong. So we've got associates in those areas that are trying to stop that product from exiting China or Hong Kong. We have, of course, our U.S. Customs. We have associates in Europe and the Middle East. Typically, those are the places where we see the most problems. So somewhere along the line, if you set up that network, the hope is, of course, that you're going to stop it at some point, in that chain, so that it doesn't get into the marketplace and do the types of harmful things that you hope it doesn't do. So some additional tools for combating counterfeit goods, as I mentioned, have a point person responsible for anti-counterfeiting and corresponds with customs. That in our case, I'm that person. It could be in-house, and as Tony was talking about. And some things that are helpful, at least with respect to the U.S. Customs officers, and I think, as Tony mentioned, it's probably the same in other places as well. Prepare a proper manual for use of your trademarks and send it out to the customs officers. You can do that in the U.S. by preparing one, sending it to customs, and they'll distribute it out to the customs officers. That gives them a shorthand reference point to look at and see whether something looks like it's an appropriate use of the mark, placement of the mark, colors, whatever it might be, on the packaging of the product. Train the customs officers to recognize those goods, as Tony mentioned. Be aware of different response periods in jurisdictions where marks are recorded. Sometimes you have to get back to them quickly. Other times you've got a little more time to do that. And I think for me, one of the biggest ones I've learned over the years is be responsive. Customs officers have a lot of work to do, and they'll focus on the parties that are responding to their inquiries. So if I get 6 emails from a customs officer saying, look, I'm holding these products, what do you want me to do with them? And I don't respond, they're going to say, I've got too many other things to do. These are getting passed, okay? So, and I think that also, if you're responsive, you build an affiliation with them. I mean, I get calls or emails from, I could probably name the customs officers in San Francisco and Seattle and on and on and on. And so we build this rapport, build a relationship, and they're more helpful. Sometimes you can get them to give you a little bit more information that maybe they should otherwise initially give you, which is helpful in making determinations. So being responsive helps them do their job, helps you get a good result from customs.
I just have one reservation on the being responsive, and this is something where we've gone to the State Department, we've gone to outside counsel in different jurisdictions. There's one area where we are not responsive, and that's where we have legitimate product that we believe is going into an embargo country. Because if we reply to customs and we confirm that the product is an authentic product, they will release it. They cannot hold it.
Right.
And so we've gotten a ton of different legal opinions, and the only thing that we've settled on is that if that product is going to Syria or any of the 5 embargo countries, Cuba, the US, we don't reply to the customs officers. We're non-responsive.
Okay, thanks. You can also provide, at least in the U.S., customs with a list of authorized exporters or importers. So if you have a business model where you have designated importers and exporters, so there's maybe 2 or 3 that are allowed to export from China or Hong Kong, there are 2 or 3 in the United States that are allowed to import, and nobody else is allowed to do so, that's a pretty easy and shorthand way to cut this off, because immediately the customs officer can say, this is not the exporter on the list, this is not an importer on the list, these don't appear to be authorized goods. You can also provide them with a list of countries from which the genuine products may be imported. The larger the company, obviously, that becomes non-helpful because there's many, many different places where the product is either being exported from or being transshipped from. Use of private investigators to obtain evidence for ex parte seizure orders. So these are orders that you can get. Typically, you see these in an instance where there is a shop in New York or something. There's a warehouse in New York or in Los Angeles or someplace, and you believe there's a significant amount of counterfeit goods being held there for distribution into the marketplace. You can coordinate with the U.S. authorities, local authorities, get an order from the court to have them go in and seize the product. Also for containers that are coming in through customs, you can do that. And but typically this requires somebody who knows what is the counterfeit good and can help make that identification with the local authorities. Okay, next slide. And as we mentioned earlier, know the problem areas. About 80% of counterfeit products come from or through Hong Kong and China. So, I mean, that really is predominantly our focus. One of the big problems, of course, is, we might get 2 or 3 shipments of counterfeit goods. We identify them as counterfeit, they get seized. We then have access to the information as to who the exporter was from China, who the importer was in the United States. We have names, we have addresses, but try to go to that factory in China and find them, and they're long gone. It's a game of whack-a-mole. You can never seem to find that party still in the same place. So that's the frustrating thing about it, and that's what's important about building this network where you can hopefully have that net which catches these products at various different places along the way, predominantly, hopefully, before they even exit China or Hong Kong.
So we have a fairly, what I would call, extensive network in China. China is actually our second largest country of sale. And so we have 16 or 17 joint venture partners there, and we partner with our joint venture partners to do counterfeit related work there also. One of the things that we do in China that I think is most helpful is we have a team of investigators that are trained in our product lines, and the majority of these investigators are their former Chinese police officers, so PSB officers, or they used to work with the local administrative agency known as AIC. The reason why this is important in China is because China, which is not something that we have in the US, you actually just have to demonstrate that you have a good faith belief that there are counterfeit products in a facility, and AIC or PSB will actually raid that facility and seize the products. So for us, this has been a very cost-effective way to stop the products in country. The second thing is for us, we actually have been fairly successful in going after manufacturers of large-scale products in China. So if you think about our engine applications, we have engines that are as large as this room, and we have counterfeiters that are trying to make engines that are as large as this room. And so we've been actually very successful in the Chinese courts, and we've actually gotten damages out of Chinese courts in 3 cases.
So you're the one.
Yeah, we are the one. And so I do, having worked now in China for probably well over the last 10 years, I think that China is actually doing a lot more than any other country to fight counterfeit-related activity through their customs organizations, through the police organizations, and now through their judicial proceedings. And so I would say don't write them off, because you kind of have to take the fight where the fight is taking place, and you can be successful if you're sort of strategic in how you want to target different parties there.
Yeah, I would add to that same experience that it seems over the last maybe 10 years or so, you're able to make more headway in China now. They've gotten laws in place. They're taking it more seriously. There's still problems, obviously, and as Tony has mentioned, the nature of the product can dictate how you approach it as well. It's hard to move a factory that makes a machine that's as big as this room. It's not very hard to move a factory that makes a tennis shoe or a handbag. So that's how you have to plan your strategy with respect to those products. We mentioned developing a network of firms and vendors responsible for policing specific geographic areas. And you can talk about, Tony, about the fight hotspots, et cetera. Using takedown procedures on e-commerce websites, that would be more for the products that are consumer products. And this can be a real headache for the brand owner, because there's a series of cases where brand owners tried to sue the e-retail sites, the eBays of the world, saying you're responsible for selling this counterfeit product or this infringing product. And the courts have pretty uniformly held, no, that's not their responsibility. They simply put the product for sale, and it's your responsibility as the brand owner to take action against it. Now, what they have done, I think partly, if not predominantly as a result of those suits, is those e-retail sites now have pretty efficient takedown procedures. So if you're a brand owner and you find that someone's selling a product on eBay, you can use that takedown procedure on eBay, make a complaint, and typically those products get removed pretty quickly. The headache with that, of course, is you have the obligation to find that product on eBay. So there's a lot of keyword searching, online keyword searching you've got to do as a brand owner to see if you can track down those products. And it's a regular full-time job, and should be taken seriously, because again, it doesn't matter if that harmful that exploding cell phone came in through a customs port, or it came in with someone who then sold it on eBay and it was a counterfeit good and someone got hurt. In the end result, your mark was on it and someone got hurt. So there's a lot of areas where you have to pursue this to make sure that you protect the brand. And then also consider use of online infringement monitoring vendors, and you can probably talk a little bit more about that one.
Yeah, so when I joined our company, we were doing a lot of this takedown work internally. It was being done by a paralegal that didn't have really have any experience in IP. And then when I came on board, she was like, great, we're going to move this to your portfolio. That lasted about 2 weeks, and I was like, I'm not doing this. I'm just not. So then I sent it to outside counsel, went and I negotiated what I thought were really aggressive rates. I'm like, this is great, but it's a full-time job, and there is a lot out there. And so I saw maybe the first 6 weeks of bills, and I'm like, I'm not doing this either. Mm-hmm. So finally, I was able to persuade one of our business teams to do a 60-day pilot with an online monitoring vendor. And what we did is we identified the brands that we wanted monitored. We identified the countries where we wanted the monitoring to take place. And within 6 weeks, they had taken down close to $900,000 worth of counterfeit products. So I took that and I went back to the businesses and I said, who's in? Now we're going to have this vendor, and we've had that vendor relationship in place now for 4 years. Every quarter, they send us data of the amount of product that they've pulled offline, and it's just amazing, because once you get serious about fighting, all you're doing really is telling those counterfeiters to go to somebody else, but that's fine. just stay away from us because I'm trying to protect my company's interest. But I think, like Bob said, online vendors can be very effective, but it really is a full-time job if you want to try to do it on your own. It's easy. It's, to find, locate, and to use all of the services that are available through the e-commerce sites. It's very, very easy, but it is time intensive.
Yeah. And this will be probably the only time you'll hear me say that you're right, that they can do it much more efficiently than an outside firm, a law firm who's handling a lot of other types of issues. That's just not something we can invest in economically and efficiently for the client. We talked a little bit earlier about problem with gray market goods, and so these are the goods that aren't necessarily, aren't counterfeit. They're authentic goods, just never meant for the U.S. market. And there's lots of reasons they might not have been meant for the U.S. market. Predominant one may be that they don't meet particular standards for the U.S. market. So, because you cannot, at least in the U.S., you cannot stop gray market goods from coming in on the basis of claiming they're counterfeit and under the customs laws, we have to get sort of creative about how we approach these. Because they can't stop them, we have to find other ways to show that this otherwise authentic good in some other market was somehow changed before it came into the United States, such that it's not the same authentic good, it's now a counterfeit good, or it's something in between, some animal that precludes it from coming into the U.S. market. And there's been a fair number of cases that talk about almost any alterations to the packaging, the description, the product itself could be enough to move it from gray market to that middle category that allows us to exclude it. So things like altering the serial numbers or batch numbers, if it has foreign language manuals or decals with it, if there's a lack of a warranty or a discounted price, different packaging or ingredients in caloric content, or failure to meet U.S. safety standards. So this is where you have to sort of get creative and really look at whether there's been any change. And what's helpful from my perspective is to actually get from the client a sample of the real authentic product for market X, so I can compare it to what's come into the U.S. and say, what's changed? I'll give you an example of one that we had that we were very successful with. So again, I do a lot of anti-counterfeiting work for a pretty large consumer electronics company, and one of the things they make is batteries. Normal batteries, AA, AAA size batteries, up to very large batteries for automobiles. And it's died down quite a lot now, but there was a period of about 1.5 years where we saw a lot of detention of hoverboards that were being brought into the United States. And what the counterfeiters were doing is they were taking authentic batteries made by our client outside the United States, and they were even intended for sale into the United States. And they would take those batteries, group them together, shrink wrap them all together, and have electrodes coming from them to make one giant battery pack, like you would do if you were 12 and you wanted to make this great toy. You took all the batteries you could find in the house and wrap them all together. Well, the problem with that is when they're wrapped that tightly in that tight a space, they overheat and they can explode, they can burn. So we had to approach this with customs saying, these are authentic batteries, but they're repackaged in a way that make them not applicable, not safe, first of all, and definitely not applicable, not just for the U.S. market, but for any market. And so, after literally 8 to 9 months of almost every day dealing with this issue, we finally saw it die down and go away. And the hard part was when they would shrink wrap the battery pack, they wouldn't put the client's logo on it. You had to dig inside to find the logo on the battery, the mark on the battery. And so, but once we educated customs officers on this and were able to make them understand that this is an alteration of the product that's not safe and not approved, we were successful in excluding.
And I think one thing that I can add here is knowing the regulatory side of the products is important here as well, because, and I'm going to date myself, but how many people have been to Beijing, or a lot of folks, Mexico City, LA in the 80s? Okay, LA in the 80s. No, so you'll remember LA in the 80s, Black Cloud. With our products, emission standards in China and other places in the world are very different than emission standards in the US. So if an engine from China makes it to the US, that engine and the particulate matter that comes out is going to make LA black, right? And so we could spend 8 or 9 months working with customs, getting them to seize these products coming to the border, or we can pick up the phone and call EPA. Because according to environmental standards, those products cannot be in the US. And so for us, that's what we do. We play the agencies off one another because we know that the EPA is going to step in immediately, come in with a heavy hammer and say these products are not going to be used in the United States. We're done. We do that with Canadian, the Canadian counterpart to the Environmental Protection Agency. We do that with the Mexican counterpart because now Mexico actually now has what's now referred to as Euro 6 standards, which is actually even more stringent than what we have in the US. And so we see that going on globally. And I think it's really important to understand, because I have some friends that work for pharmaceutical companies, they do the exact same things. When they have challenges with customs, they're like, okay, I'm calling in the FDA. You can play around with customs for 8 or 9 months, or you can figure out whether there's a regulatory agency that has a heavier hammer. And so those are some of the things that we try to balance.
Okay. This is, I think, yours.
So what I have found is a lot of organizations, and I have several friends that work in-house, we're all trying to figure out how to structure for success, because this is a lot of work, if you can tell by sort of my fatigue over this. You have to have experts internally who within 24 or 48 hours can verify products and report back to customs or outside counsel or whoever is the reporting agency. You have to have the financial resources and the resolve, I think, to want to take on this fight. And you actually have to have the, I think, subject matter experts who know that this is their day job and they're well trained in this area and they're connected to police officers, et cetera. And that takes a significant amount of organization. And so what we've learned at our company is we now have regional anti-counterfeiting committees. We have our global security department involved. We have our government affairs department, as well as legal. And then, of course, the businesses. And the way that this looks is, I can give you just an example. We had a team that was at a trade show in Germany, and they thought that they suspected that there was a product on the trade show floor that was not real. So they immediately called the legal department. The legal department then reached out to our government affairs representative in Germany, and that representative actually engaged local customs, and they went on the trade show floor and they were able to work with customs to get the product seized immediately. Our global security office accompanied our government affairs division as well as our outside counsel, and we just think that that's a really good example of how important it is to have everybody involved in the fight across the entire organization. And I don't think that until that incident happened that we had that level of integration. And now it's like everybody's interested in counterfeiting. My CEO is interested in counterfeiting. He just thinks this is spectacular. But I think that internal alignment has done a lot for our company. The fact that we trace financially now how much product we're seizing globally, and all of the business presidents know. So now it's like kind of a game for them. They're like, oh, you guys have a lot of product that's been seized. What are you doing? And so I think internal alignment has gone a long way in making sure that we can get everybody involved in this global fight. So that's my slide.
Okay. Any questions? Yes.
I think you might have addressed this. I just wanted to ask, do you feel like the majority of the counterfeit items come from China because that's where we get majority of our products are made there? Do you feel like that's the reason that, or is it that they're just a hub for these counterfeit materials?
You want to take it?
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple layers of that. Yes, a lot of products come from China. There's a lot of manufacturing in China, of particularly manufacturing that's relatively easy, non-technical manufacturing. But historically, the mindset in China has been, there is no IP protection. There are no IP rights. There are no trademark rights. If you can make $1 on it, you make it. And that's a mindset I think that we agree seems to be, well, I don't know if the mindset is changing, but the authorities who have control over what happens from that, I think their mindset is changing in terms of how it affects the rest of the world and what happens with it. So yeah, I mean, I think that part of the problem in we talked about earlier about, what drives people to do this, to make counterfeit goods is it's economic. I mean, I can't, in my country, it's difficult to make a living. So I'm not going to think about the results of what I'm doing. I'm going to think about how I'm going to make a living. And so, that's a historic mindset that I think is changing. But who's to say that tomorrow that doesn't shift to some other country, Vietnam or somewhere else, where people want a job and they don't particularly care what the end result of what they're making is in terms of the effect on the global market.
I was just going to agree with you, yes. China has 1.2 billion people. And even if you go to what they refer to as a third-tier city, that's the size of New York City. Those people have to eat and live. And so I think the economics are, they have the people, they have the hands, they have the land, they have the manufacturing. And so they're going to make product because they're already making legitimate product. I take a little bit of a different stance because it was U.S. commercial interests that decided to place these factories in China in the 70s. My company was one. We went in 1971. So when you go in and you build the infrastructure and you have these factories, the corresponding side to that is that when you decide you're going to leave those factories, because you don't own land in China, everything in China, the land is owned by the government. You only get a lease. When that lease is up and you move on someplace else, someone's moving into that factory to manufacture something. So I think it's empty hands, idle hands. They're manufacturing and selling and shipping, and they have the infrastructure to do that. And we enable them. We enabled the process, is my sense.
Yeah, and I agree. And I'll add to that. I have a particular client in California who makes a lot of kitchenware items. The anywhere from bakeware up to spatulas, dollar items, spatulas, and things like that. Who manufactures in China? And what they found is that if they, with their products, can't keep that factory 100% busy, as soon as there's downtime in that factory is going to look for something else to make. And if they can't find something else to make, they're going to make more of that same good and sell it elsewhere. Or what happens is, the factory across the alley, out the back door, is idle. So they run the day shift for authentic goods for my client, and at night the molds move across the alley to this factory and they make them for somebody else and they come back the next day. So the end result is the client said, we're done with this. They bought their own factory in China. And so if there's downtime, hey, it's our issue. Yeah. But they don't use outside factories because of those economic issues. That factory owner has got to make money. Those workers have to work. Yes?
I know you guys discussed e-commerce and counterfeiting. I just had a question about the dark web. How you guys combat like Silk Road-esque Bitcoin counterfeiting?
If they tell you, they'll have to kill you.
Yeah. So how about I just address the question of how our company approaches Bitcoin? Because we've got a lot of legal opinions on this also. I'd say probably about 2 years ago, we have a pretty savvy chief information security officer and our head of global security and our head of our treasury division. And there was a lot of discussion at that point about whether it was ethically. I mean, our company is really, really big on making decisions that we feel that we can live with. And so we had spent a lot of time thinking about whether it was ethical to buy Bitcoin. And then you'll see there were a lot of cyber incidents that happened in hospitals and schools and emergency rooms. Then their systems were held hostage and they decided that having a bit of Bitcoin in the bank was worth it to hopefully offset anything that would happen with any of our products. Because our products, just so you know, are have a lot of remote applications. So if you have one of our engines, I know where you are. And so for us, having the option to have Bitcoin available if needed, and knowing that that was something that in certain jurisdictions, because we did a jurisdictional assessment, and there are certain jurisdictions like in China, if you trade in Bitcoin, it is a crime. Not civil liability, it is a crime. And so we did a jurisdictional approach, and we decided that we could purchase in the US, and should anything happen, that we feel comfortable holding on to it. That doesn't address your dark web question, which is what steps we're taking to monitor those platforms. And that's information that I cannot share.
Yeah, same here.
Secret?
Any other questions?
Okay.
All right, thank you.